grow up. And far too often, something happens when they're like around the age of Marlon over there, and the preteen, the early adolescent years, and they stop dreaming. No one knows what they want to be when they grow up anymore. And you know, it might be because they had a bad grade, or they had a less than passionate teacher, or maybe they had a devastation, a loss of a loved one, or a pandemic, or an unkind word from someone, a parent, a sibling, somebody who said something, someone they didn't even know. It breaks the child's spirit, and sometimes they never recover. As you know, one of my passions is screening for and addressing adverse childhood experiences, because we know that adversity in childhood is associated not only with future behavioral health needs, like depression, suicide, and substance abuse, but because they're also associated with an increased risk of 9 of the top 10 physical causes of death in the United States of America. Things like heart disease, diabetes, asthma, autoimmune diseases like lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, chronic lung disease. All of that is affected by what happens to you in your childhood and your adolescence, and we know that we can interrupt this cycle of toxic stress response and actually reduce the incidence of death and disease from these for this generation and for the generations to come. So this question of how can I make the most of my life has the utmost importance, not only for me, but also for every single person that we encounter, for all of humanity that's been made in the image of God. So my life's purpose statement every morning when I wake up, before I leave my room, I review my life's purpose statement a little bit before I get going. There's a few other things I look at too, like the Word of God and other stuff, but I wanted to share a little bit of my life's purpose statement. So my life's purpose or work is to live at all times for Jesus' pleasure, becoming more and more like Him in every way, doing the good works that God desires for me, that He created for me to do, particularly taking care of the poor and helping to train up the children in the way they should go. I will live as an ambassador for Christ, representing Jesus to others, drawing them to Him, knowing that the time is short. I will be a part of true fellowship, spurring one another on to love and good deeds. And I will live as if physical exercise has some value, but spiritual exercise is much more important because it promises a reward both in this life and in the next. All of those are actually based out of verses in the Bible, which we're not going to look at all those today. But I think it's so important for us to know what our purpose is in life and to walk in that. And so I review that for myself every day before I get going to make sure that, at least at the beginning, I'm going to align with what God's called me to do. Our call is to make the most of our lives and not someone else's life. So each of us has been given certain spiritual gifts, and Romans chapter 12 verses 4 through 13 that we looked at on day 4 includes that. So en día 4 en su libro de semana 7. En página 152, no, 154, en el segundo parágrafo dice un poquito de este versículo de Romanos. Romanos 12, 4 a 13 voy a leer. Okay, I'm going to read it in English, and then I'll just read verse 11 in Spanish for us. Romans chapter 12, verses 4 through 13. Debbie's very familiar with this verse because we studied it on a missions trip to Haiti and the DR a few years back. So it says, "For just as each of us has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function, so in Christ, we, though many, form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. We have different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. If your gift is prophesying, then prophesy in accordance with your faith. If it's serving, then serve. If it's teaching, then teach. If it's to encourage, then give encouragement. If it's giving, then give generously. If it's to lead, do it diligently. If it's to show mercy, do it cheerfully. Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer." So en español, el versículo 11 de Romanos 12 dice, Nunca dejen de ser diligentes. Antes bien, sirvan al Señor con el fervor que da el Espíritu. And the way that they translated on page in day 4 in our book was, never be lazy, but work hard and serve the Lord enthusiastically. So, and we've got lots of opportunities to serve and lots of opportunities to be lazy. But God's call for us is not to be lazy, but to serve the Lord diligently. So then the question is, how do we serve Him? And one of the biggest ways that we serve Him is by serving one another. And in day 1, we looked at the parable of the Good Samaritan. And I'm going to share that with us because I think it really has a word to speak to us. So Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. So Lucas 10, 25 a 37 está en el libro del David, en página 142. Aquí es la parábola del buen samaritano. También Lucas 10, 25 a 35. Super familiar parable for us, right? On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? What is written in the law? He replied, how do you read it? He answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. You've answered correctly, Jesus replied. Do this and you will live. But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? I love this guy because that is so me. Not because I want to know the answer and actually live it, but because I love being right. If I've said that a million times, you guys know that, right? So I love being right, and this guy's like, okay, I got it. I got the right answer, thank you. How can I justify myself? Then Jesus gives him a parable that is not so easy to follow. In reply, Jesus said a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robber? The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. So I was running yesterday at the beach, and I was running past Venice, and this parable came to me, and I imagine there's a synagogue on Venice Beach called the Shul at the beach, right? So I was just imagining, as I'm running past, that one of the wealthy patrons who are going to the Shul at the beach is on Venice and gets beat up. Like, that could totally happen, right? Robbed, lay there, could certainly happen. And they're about to start their service. So the priest walks past because he's got to start his service, right? And the people who are going to the service, they walk past because they got to get to service too. And then one of those, the medical marijuana guys that are out there on Venice Beach, you know what I'm talking about, they have the cards and they're like, here, you want this? We'll get you your medical marijuana. One of them comes up to the person who was on their way to church and got beat up, and picks them up, cleans them up, takes them to the Lowe's, puts their credit card down, and says, here, take care of this guy. When he's well, I'll pay the bill, and then goes on his way. That's really what the parable of the Good Samaritan is like. I mean, can you imagine? It's like the medical marijuana guy helping, the religious person up. So the question that I want us to think about, la pregunta que quiero que pensamos es, ¿quién en nuestra sociedad necesitan más ayuda? So who in our society right now are marginalized? Who are outcasts? Who needs to see mercy? And how can we show them mercy? And who are they? Who are our brothers and sisters? So on 2, we looked at one of my favorite passages in the whole Bible. I have a lot of them, but anyway, this is one. In Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 through 40. So in Mateo 25, versículo 31 o 40, en página 146 en nuestro libro.
42.
I have 146. For day 2 in the Spanish. Is it a different, maybe I have a different version?
Oh, maybe the older book has different page numbers.
Okay, sorry. Dia dos? Yeah, you got it.
Sorry.
No worries. So the question before us is not only who are the marginalized in our society, which people need mercy, but who are our brothers and sisters. So this is Jesus speaking again. It's in red in my Bible. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father. Take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick and in prison and go to visit you?" The king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." So this was, I believe, our memory verse for this week. It was our memory verse for this week, verse 40. Versículo 40 de este capítulo dice: "El rey les responderá, les siguieron que todo lo que hicieron por uno de mis hermanos, por el más pequeño, lo hicieron por mí." And I think the fact that Jesus here is calling the people who are hungry and thirsty and in prison and needing clothes his brothers and sisters is very powerful and important. If Jesus calls them his brothers and sisters, then they're probably our brothers and sisters as well, right? And how would we treat our own brothers and sisters? This is so important. And then the passage right below that, aquí Lucas 14, 12 a 14, ahí, right? Beneath that says, in Luke chapter 14, verses 12 through 14, Jesus says to his host, "When you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers or sisters, your relatives, or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back, and so you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you'll be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." We know that, in fact, they may not repay you with lunch, but oftentimes we do experience an incredible blessing when we give and invite the poor to come and serve with us. How can we invite them to a luncheon? How can we invite them to be a part of what we're doing? 45 million people. I'm just going to share some statistics for you, and I'll let you think about the answers to those questions as we move forward. 45 million people in 43 countries around the globe are at risk of starvation. Over 500,000 are already living in famine-like conditions, and the remaining 44 million are at grave risk of falling into famine. Russia and Ukraine account for 1/3 of the global market's wheat supply. So what I did this week was ask my member of Congress to commit to stop the use of hunger as a weapon, addressing food insecurity through continued humanitarian response. They have a resolution in Congress right now. It's called Hunger Resolution 922, and it calls for the use of diplomatic efforts to address instances where hunger is being used as a weapon. It's also to ensure interagency preparedness and integrations, and to consider additional tools when appropriate to hold individuals, governments, and militias accountable for using hunger and conflict. There are nearly 100 million people right now who live in environments where conflict is the main driver of food crises. Conflict, not lack of food. It's the conflict that doesn't allow them to access food. South Sudan is currently facing its worst floods in nearly 60 years. Early seasonal rains have caused rivers to overflow their dikes and banks, inundating vast areas and settlements. Many of the floods affected people in the country, and they've relocated to higher ground, some as many as 3 times. Others who were replaced by flooding in 2020 have not yet returned home. Floods have compounded a pre-existing dire humanitarian situation, including the hunger crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic, and oftentimes when these people groups leave their area to go to another people group, they're going someplace where people already live, and nobody likes new people coming into their community, right? So then there's more conflict going on in their communities. The Climate Change Vulnerability Index of 2017 states that climate change will be felt 2.5 times more in South Sudan than the global average. The World Vision program manager in the region describes the situation. There were 3 children and a man who drowned. Many families lost their loved ones. The local government has appealed to all humanitarian agencies working in the region to respond. The need is huge. The children swim in dirty water, fueling worries of waterborne diseases. Marion Nessel, in the book Soda Politics, says the amount of water used by Coca-Cola in 1 year could meet the entire needs of people who lack access to clean drinking water for 47 days. The amount of water used to make Coke could meet the needs of water for 47 days for all the people who don't have water. In a world where 1 of 5 people do not have access to potable water, it is indeed preposterous that any company could extract such large amounts of life-sustaining water and convert the vast majority of the fresh water into wastewater. Basically, stuff that just comes out the other end. So, ways to think about how we can love our brothers and sisters. Those are some of my thoughts. In day 3, we look at what is poverty. Día 3 de semana 7, I'm going to stop saying page numbers. En el libro, Cuando ayuda duele, cómo aliviar la pobreza sin dañar a los pobres, en el medio de página dice, normalmente entendemos la pobreza en términos materiales. Lógicamente asumimos que el trabajo entre los pobres principalmente se trata de aprovechar recursos o habilidades. Aún así, ellos demuestran que la pobreza, como es definida por quienes que son considerados pobres, a menudo se entiende principalmente en términos fundamentales psicológicos. Términos como impotente, vergonzoso, indigno y otros son los que ellos mismos se aplican. So, day 3, they use words like poverty. They use words, like powerless, shameful, worthless, and others to talk about what it means to be in poverty. So it's not just the physical needs, but it's also the emotional and the spiritual needs that wind up making people feel that they're living in poverty. I loved, if you got a chance to look at the last page, maybe you haven't yet, of this week's ¿Qué es la pobreza? En la última día de semana 7. It talks about what is poverty. And Pastor Daniel Nunez talks about his feeding program that they had there in Tijuana. It's an article that Lo Mejor del Frigo Church started a breakfast program. And he says, though the people in our community experience extreme poverty, they are rich in the things that matter. They care deeply about their children. They want something better for their families and neighborhoods. They feel and express God's unfailing love in simple yet beautiful ways. Dice aquí que si bien las personas en nuestra comunidad sufren de pobreza extrema, son ricas en las cosas que realmente importan. Ellos se preocupan mucho por los hijos, quieren al mejor para sus familias y desindiarlos. Sientan y expresan el amor incondicional de Dios en formas simples y hermosas. Incluso con las pocas posesiones que tienen, saben que están marcando la diferencia para cambiar sociedad. So, thank you. They are making a change in their community with what they've got. Breakfast makes a huge difference. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. As a consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic, an estimated 1.6 billion young learners in 199 countries worldwide were affected by school closures, with nearly 379 million children in 150 countries going without school meals. And oftentimes, the school meal is the only thing that they get. Even here in the U.S., in Los Angeles, this is actually Los Angeles County data. Typical food insecurity in Los Angeles County prior to the pandemic was 1 in 10 households. Since April 2020, 34% of all LA County households experience food insecurity. 40% of Hispanic and Latinos, 39% of African Americans, and 28% of Asians experience food insecurity in LA County as a consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic. We know that food insecurity leads to a host of other negative physical and mental health outcomes for children and adults, including poor nutrition, worse general health, anxiety, depression, a higher risk for obesity, diabetes, and hypertension. The school just ended Friday, right? So many of the children in this community, there's 2 schools, like I can see them right here, standing here. Many of the children in this community receive their meals from school lunch and school breakfast, right? So the USDA runs the summer lunch program differently than the school lunch, and any organization can apply to be a part of the summer lunch program. Basically, what you do is what the USDA does is they get people in the community with kitchens, like a school or a church that has a kitchen, to cook the food, and then they get other people in the community to run the lunch, and they serve lunch. So it is my dream that sometime soon People's Church would be able to be a part of the summer lunch program for these kids in our community, which again may be the only meal that they are guaranteed to have every day. So that would be amazing to really transform poverty into riches. So with that in mind, what should we do, right? Día 5 es el regreso al shalom. Primero Juan 3, 18 a 19. Voy a leer en inglés 16, versículo 16 hasta so 1 John, the ladies in my Bible study know we've been sitting in 1 John for a little while, and so good. 1 John chapter 3, verses 16 through 18 says, "This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters." Remember, we just talked about who they are, everybody, particularly those who need food and clothing and are in jail and are needing a visitor, right? Hospitalized, all of that. So it says here, we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. Voy a leerlo en español también. Dice, queridos hijos, no amemos de palabra ni de labios, no amemos ya, de palabra ni de labios para afuera, sino con hechos y de verdad. So the question I have for us is, how can I, as an individual, me, myself, love with actions and in truth? How can we, as a church body, as our People's Church body, love with actions and in truth? How can we, as the global body of Jesus Christ, love with actions and in truth? What is God calling us to do? This is our theme verse for my team this summer. I'll be running the Hood to Coast Relay once again in Oregon, 200 miles from the top of Mount Hood down to the ocean, with 11 of my favorite women friends, or people I haven't met yet, but they will be by the time we finish, my dear friends, because we will be hot and sweaty in a van for 2 days. And our team is called the Ultimate Girls Trip for South Sudan. We're running with Team World Vision for water in South Sudan for the water work, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a second. But this is our theme verse, 1 John chapter 3, verse 17. How can we love in actions and in truth? We have the privilege this year of South Sudan is a fragile context. So I was just talking with Albert about his sponsor child in Sri Lanka, and I have a sponsor child in Ethiopia, and we've been receiving some information about the communities that they're in, letting us know that there are a lot of challenges. And in fragile contexts, sometimes we can't even get in to do the work in that community, so we just help the people who are from that community, like the refugees. So typically what we've done is a lot of water work in Kenya and in the neighboring communities, Uganda, that are around South Sudan, because we haven't been able to access the work in South Sudan. But this year, we actually are getting to do a part of a project in South Sudan, a $640,000 project that our team is going to be funding this year, that will provide early warning for when the dikes start to rise before they overflow, before the flooding happens. So that's one part of it. So it's sort of like if you guys have that earthquake app that you can get here in LA that warns you right before an earthquake's gonna happen, so you can like stop, drop, and whatever you need to do, get out of the way of the millions of glasses. This is a similar thing. We're gonna be able to notify the people in the community that the flood is about to come. In addition to that, part of this awesome work that we're doing is going to use all the technology that the satellites are now able to tell us. So you know how, okay, Debbie doesn't know, but when I was young and the weatherman told you that it was going to rain tomorrow, you like put on your shorts because it wasn't going to rain. They were so wrong. They were so wrong now, right? But now, because we have all of the amazing satellite technology, when they tell you it's going to rain tomorrow, like you get all your rain gear. When they tell you it's going to be 100 degrees, you get ready for it, right? So we have this technology. Well, they don't have that technology in South Sudan. We're going to help them access that technology so they'll be able to know, like, actually what the weather's going to be, so that they're prepared for it. We're also going to provide some fruit trees for some of the families that are living in that community, and some ground cover, because when it floods, then you can actually use the water to absorb in the roots of the trees, and then you actually don't have so much flooding, right? And then we're also going to help build a catchment, and in that catchment there's going to be water treatment so that they can actually catch the water and treat the water and then use it in the dry season. So really exciting for me. One of the ways that I get to be a part of being God's hands and feet, and loving in action and in truth. I want to share lastly with you all, somebody, Ron, can you pass these to everybody? This is a prayer that I pray every day. If you know me, so like it sounds really spiritual that I get up and look at my mission in life every day, but I'm also actually stretching and foam rolling and like doing the things that I need to do so I don't die when I get out there and run at the same time. So this one I pray every day while I'm literally working on touching my toes because I am so not flexible. But I think as we can put this prayer into action, then we're going to really be able to change the world and the community around us. And so I would like for us to finish with this. This comes from the Book of Common Prayer, which is the Episcopalian prayer book. And yeah, more if you need one more. Very good. Perfect. Two more. We're good? Awesome. Okay. So join me in prayer. Vamos a orar. Grant, O God, that your holy, life-giving spirit may so move our hearts that we may learn to love what you love and hate what you hate, because we love you with our whole heart and mind and strength. God, you have bound us together in a common struggle for justice and truth. Nurture in us a love for our neighbors like your love for us. Strengthen us to bring down every injustice, every form of oppression, every evil scheme, to establish justice and peace. Almighty and merciful God, we remember before you all poor and neglected persons whom it would be easy for us to forget. Look with pity, Heavenly Father, on all who live with injustice, terror, disease, and death as their constant companions. Have mercy on us for what we've left undone in the fight for justice. Help us eliminate all cruelty to these our neighbors